Hey Siri, what's a source material bait?
I found this on the web.
Oh, there it is, right there. Spirit Chronicles. Jokes aside, Spirit Chronicles is a series that I really wanted to enjoy, and there's certain aspects of it that I did enjoy. But this is my review of Spirit Chronicles or Seirei Gensouki, a series that aired in the summer 2021 anime season that ran for 12 episodes. So let's jump into it. Spirit Chronicles, being a isekai, opens up similar to most of them. We do have a guy named Haruto who is in the modern times Japan. At some point, he's on a bus. The bus starts going crazy for some reason, starts rushing down a street until it goes into the path of a train. It gets piled over by a train, and he is then transported into another world, a fantasy world. And interestingly enough, he's not transported there himself. Rather, his spirit and his mind is transported and injected into a boy named Ryo. And Ryo is basically a poor boy that is inside of the slums of this particular kingdom. And he's sort of mistreated, but he's living alongside a bunch of thugs. And then one day, these thugs end up bringing in, inside of a bag, a princess of this particular kingdom. And after running into some people looking for the princess, he ends up essentially coming back to their hideout, and all the guys that he was with are all murdered, and this assassin tries to kill him as well. And it's at that time that the spirit appears out of nowhere and gives him the knowledge of using spirit arts, which are basically a very powerful ability within this world. And he used these skills along with the knowledge that Haruto embedded into him in how to use a sword to protect himself and to fight off this assassin. And following this, he ends up rescuing the princess and taking him back to the guards, where he's immediately seen as being the one that actually kidnapped her. And after being thoroughly abused by the knights of this particular kingdom who are trying to push some sort of information out of him as to how she was kidnapped, she ends up awakening and telling them to stop. And at that point, the king awards him with whatever he wishes, and Ryo decides to choose to become a part of the Royal Academy. Speeding the story up a little bit, he eventually has to leave the kingdom. He ends up going on a journey to try to find out the killer of his self that's in this world's mother. And this leads him to meeting different people along his journey. He ends up going to a spirit village and so on and so forth, but eventually finding out the history of his bloodline. And it's in my butchered telling of the story itself that I get into my major issue of the story itself. Focus. The story doesn't really have much focus. Now, granted, it is a journey to initially find out the heritage of the self of Ryo that is in this world, but it often finds itself, I guess, forgetting where it's really going. And I think a lot of my struggle that I had with the series early on was that I really wasn't sure what they were trying to paint Ryo or Haruto himself as. It makes it out as if this Haruto guy from our time was injected into the body of this Ryo, who is this boy that's in this world, but it never really makes it clear as to who has control. Is Haruto in the body of Ryo and thus taking over his life? Or is Ryo like, okay, now I have this knowledge of this Haruto, but I want to live the life that I want to live still. It's just for some reason there's these memories in my head. And I was never really sure if they were bouncing back and forth between the two of them, because at some point out of nowhere, he just starts acting as if he's Haruto, and that Ryo never exists. But he's always wanting to fulfill the wishes of Ryo and finding his bloodline. So in the end, I just kind of chopped it up as maybe something wasn't really properly adapted in the story, and maybe they're just one being, and that's just how it is. But even still, I was enjoying the journey itself. Following Haruto as he essentially is getting more powerful. He's going on this journey, meeting different people, going to different locations where there's different cultures. I did find that interesting. Going to the spirit village, eventually going into this place that almost looks like it's more Japanese culture, which is basically the heritage of Ryo. All that stuff was definitely interesting. Getting into his history, yes, very much not a shock to anybody that he's, what he is. All these things were, yes, very typical, very harem-esque, but it was a fun little journey. But at some point during this journey, I became frustrated. And the reason why I became frustrated is because I realized at some point, we're probably not going to get to anything. Like, I don't see the story getting to anywhere concrete, getting to any sort of climax. And in the end, that ended up being the case. I felt like after the show was done, we never really did anything. All we did is basically have him go to different villages, find harem members, swoon them unexpectedly, and then when he leaves, be wondering why they're crying and go, I'm sorry, I gotta leave tomorrow, and they just cry and he leaves. And that's what it really turned into was, okay, where's the next village? He's gonna find some harem members, swoon them because he's so super cool, and then he goes to leave and they cry, and then he goes to the next village and he finds another cute harem girl, he swoons them, he leaves, they cry, he wonders why they're crying, And that was basically the story. All the while becoming more and more powerful because obviously this is a power fantasy isekai, which there's nothing wrong with that. And this really does place me into a conundrum because on one hand, I think the characters are cool. I like a lot of the character designs. I think a lot of the harem members are cute. I think Haruto's an okay guy, even though at some point in the story, I just thought he was a total jerk because he just keeps basically leading girls on with dates and stuff and then wondering why they fall in love with him and then saying, sorry, I can't fall in love with you, bye. I think in the end, he did end up turning into one of my most hated harem protagonist characters because he's a jerk and he doesn't know why he's a jerk. He just, like I said, plays with hearts and then goes, oh, you're in love with me? Sorry, I didn't mean that to be a thing, and then walks away. But I think, again, my conundrum is that along with the characters being pretty solid that he's around him, the world itself is super fascinating. I want to know more about this world. I think it's developing so many different nations, so many different facets, so many different cultures that I liked exploring. That was what kept me going the entire time, was that he's going to this place and this place and this place, but all the while not really spending much time in each. I did get a little frustrated in the idea that it would be like he'd arrive somewhere and then next scene, it's been 5 years, and then boom, he's leaving. But I was fascinated by that world. It's got a very expansive world. But unfortunately, like I said, at some point I realized we're not going to do anything with any of this, are we? And sure enough, by the end of the show, I'm going, so this is just a big, huge prologue? That's essentially what it is. This entire show is a prologue. This is a prologue story to tell him how he gets to the real adventure. And so I'm in a difficult situation where I can't recommend this show at all because this is prime example of, unless they announce a second season, which with how rushed that last episode was and that last segment, I don't believe this will have a second season. I believe this was straight up light novel bait. This was, hey, here his journey. This is his journey to the first chapter basically being completed. Welcome to the real story. See you in the light novel. It was even ridiculous enough that it did the age-old issue of the last minute you hear the music ramping up and suddenly like 50 characters show up and end. They did that thing. And that is literally ultimate sin number 1 for Andrew. I hate when shows do that. If you ever start to hear that ending music and then suddenly it starts showing a bunch of stuff, I get real angry. And I have to struggle with myself not to make that reflect entirely upon my review. Because, like I said, I did enjoy this show. I did go along with it. I thought it was cool. The world's fascinating. The rules are interesting. The nations are interesting. I want to see Rio beat the crap out of Charles. It did that for me. But at the same time, in the end, feel cheated by this show because I didn't get anything out of it. I didn't get a climactic battle. There was no big epic battle at the end. There was no point in which he ever found any difficulty. There was no struggle. There was no conflict. There was nothing besides him being treated like a commoner in the early parts, being pursued by an assassin, and then eventually making a bunch of harem members cry. And that's the unfortunate thing. I think it had a lot of potential here. So much potential in the story. And that's what had me going the entire time. It's just in the end, it didn't deliver anything. And that's the unfortunate thing. It was even so much more frustrating, the idea that you technically don't really get a conclusion to the story unless you read this goofy little comic strip they have at the end of each episode to find out, oh, okay, so that's where they went. I guess that's an ending. So yeah, I think if you want to watch a harem show where the protagonist goes around and makes a bunch of harem members cry and he's super overpowered, you'll find some fun here. I won't disagree with that. I think, like I said, that was technically the love and hate thing that I had of this show, was this aspect of him essentially finding a bunch of cute girls, but the unfortunate thing of making them all cry. Power fantasy stuff, isekai elements, me trying to figure out which one, Rio or Haruto, is actually controlling the show. All that kind of stuff was always kind of the question mark that I had throughout the series. Throwing a main villain into the show at the last minute in like the 10th episode was interesting as well. I don't know. I'm just going to chop this up as a very bad adaptation of a good story. There it is. That's my thoughts on Spirit Chronicles. I wanted to really enjoy it, all honesty. I just think it kind of spit in my face at the end. So that's where I'm at. That's Spirit Chronicles. Hope you guys enjoyed this review. If you did, leave a like down below. Comment. Let me know what you thought of the series, or if you're going to check it out. Subscribe if you haven't already. Share this video if you can. Support us on Patreon if you can. I definitely appreciate all of our supporters. And y'all take care.